What do you see? Some of you might see this. Not sharks off the south coast, even though we do have some. But you might see a marine environment. You might see wildlife. You might see the sea bass that you saw whilst snorkeling. You might see the beautiful coral reefs that you saw on holiday one day. You might see this. You might see swimming, paddleboarding, sailing, recreation. Some of you might even see food. I see this. Or in reality, I kind of see this, which is even worse. I do see some of the other things as well. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist. Sharks were my favourite animal. So I do see the other things, but when I look at the sea, this is what I see. I see plastic. And it's kind of the fault of this guy here. This is Captain Charles Moore. He is one of my heroes. And believe it or not, even though I'm standing here in front of you, I'm incredibly shy. I don't like talking to people that I don't know, and particularly my heroes. And I was sitting behind Captain Charles Moore at the 6th International Marine Debris Conference. Yes, I know. It was the best nerd fest I've been to. I was so excited, I could not even ask to have a selfie with him. So this was my attempt at a really bad selfie. So you're probably thinking, who is Captain Charles Moore? I think I got quite a good one here, because he's smiling really happily. Well, Captain Charles Moore is the man who was credited in discovering what we now know as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. He's a sailor, and he was sailing through this patch in 1997 and suddenly realised that all surrounding him were vast areas, as far as the eye could see, of rubbish. It was a variety of sizes, it was a variety of materials, and he pledged to come back and actually discover more about this area, because he realised that this was something that at the time not a lot of people were really talking about. What he found was number one. So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is one of the 5 gyres, and a gyre is basically a converging set of currents, oceanic currents, that a little bit like your plug hole, but in massive scale, pull everything towards the centre. So of course, everything towards the centre might be organic material, it might be things that are floating, it might be things that are not floating, but it draws towards a particular part. And he discovered the Great Pacific Garbage Patch all the way back in 1997. He wrote a book about this called Plastic Ocean in 2011, and this became one of the most fundamental pieces of work that I'd read, that as I was going through my career as a designer, I suddenly realised this was the purpose and the thing that was going to drive me onwards. So I've been talking about plastic for a long time. I'm quite often called the plastic police, and I don't really need to talk to many of you about plastic, because it's something that we now know is a huge issue in our world in many, many different ways. But we can talk about the plastic problem in lots of different ways. We can talk about the fact that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is visible from space and approximately 3 times the size of France. That's pretty staggering. And that is mostly plastic. We could also talk about volume. Now, plastic was created a very, very long time ago, but it really started to grow after the Second World War. So from the 1950s onwards is when we saw this exponential growth in the use and the flood of plastic onto our landscape as we know it. Now, we make about 450 million tonnes per year. That's massive. It's also wasteful. Plastic is our single-use material, even though it lasts forever. About 350 million tonnes is waste. And what's really difficult to quantify is how much ends up in our ocean. Because as we've already shown, you can't really see a lot of it. About 1 to 2 million tonnes is estimated. Some estimations go up to 8 million tonnes of plastic entering our global oceans every single year. But the way I quite often describe it is this, because we can visualize this, right? We can visualize off the top of Beachy Head or a cliff of your choice, a rubbish truck backing up every single minute and dumping plastic into our ocean. We can see that. Horrifying. But what is it made of? What is ocean plastic actually made of? Well, it's made of a huge amount of stuff. It's made of consumer packaging. It's made of disposable items. It's made of industry waste as well. So it could be anything from plastic straws, because they are still used in some of the world, all the way through to drinks bottles, through to fragments of elements, and through to things like this, which is fishing nets or fishing net fragments. But the way we talk about it in the research space for marine plastics is we talk about origin and we talk about size. So there are 5 sizes that we quantify marine plastic into. The first one is the megaplastics. So anything from 100 millimeters and above. And this is the area that I mostly look into, particularly with second life materials around fishing industry waste. Then we go to the macroplastics. This is like 20 to 100 mil. This might be your plastic bottle. It might be plastic bags, for example. We then have the mesoplastics. That might be the lids of your bottles, so anything 5 to 20. We go down to the microplastics, which is less than 5 mil, and then we go all the way down to the bottom, which is your nanoplastics. Now, regardless of what size the plastic enters our ocean, it will always get smaller. So even your megaplastics will eventually end up as nanoplastics. Now, just to be clear, no plastic when it enters the ocean currently is ever biodegradable, regardless of what it might say on the package. Because the temperatures are so low, it does not degrade in the way that biodegradable packaging needs to. You have to have high temperatures for that. It will degrade through UV degradation and the movement of the oceans, but it will still exist. A fish doesn't care if it's a bioplastic or if it's a synthetic plastic. It will get eaten just the same, or it will smother our oceans just the same. Most of it's invisible. So right at the beginning, when I said to you, what do you see? It's the curse of my research area and interest and drive and passion that I see all that plastic, because you can't see it. So it does mean that even though we've been talking about marine plastics for many years, we still need to talk about it, because otherwise, how are you going to know that it's ever there? But some of you might be thinking, hang on a minute. You told us where the gyres are. You told us that all this plastic gets drawn into these areas. So surely if you know where it is, you can go and hoover it up or vacuum it up. Unfortunately, no. Because plastic, by its very nature, is wonderfully complicated and has many different densities. So some of it will float, but a lot of it will be in different densities and sitting within the water column to the deepest of depths. The deepest part of our ocean, the Mariana Trench, has plastic bags in it. We're never going to get them back. And also when we look at the scale, this is like a plastic soup that has been drawn up by a trawl from the Algalita research vessel, which was the vessel that was founded by Captain Charles Moore. And we can see here that if we think about the food chain of the marine environment, we have the smallest organisms and the planktons, all the way up to the small fish. And if we were to start vacuuming up all of these little bits of plastic, we could potentially be removing a large amount of that bottom of the food chain as well, which could have catastrophic effects on everything above it. So we do need to talk about impact. About 90% of birds are estimated to have ingested marine plastics in some form, some fatally, some not. Not only through ingestion, we have issues with entanglement. So you might hear the stories of whales that get their tails caught, particularly tails, sometimes fins caught in nets in particular. But seabirds, to them, it's just really super cool, colourful bits that they can put in their nest. When we think about birds wanting to attract the attention of the other, this is the equivalent of going to like high-end design, right? And go and look at the colours of the season. I've got the best blue nest, come on. But the chicks might get entangled in that and not even leave the nest itself. We can also think about the toxins of plastic. Now, another really scary thing I quite often say when I do these talks is to think about all the plastic we've ever created on this planet, all the way since the 1950s. Unless we've incinerated it, Every single piece exists. Maybe on the nano level, but it is still here somewhere. And what plastic is great at doing when it hangs around in our oceans is attracting all of the other things that don't want to be free-flowing in the water. So anything that is considered hydrophobic, the other toxins and chemicals, heavy metals, they want to stick to something solid. And what's going to be around for a long time? Plastic. So not only the chemicals that are in the plastic causing harm, it's everything else that wants to stick to it. The way to think about it is if you ever make a lasagna or anything oily and you rinse it out and you get that film that's stuck around your sink, that's because it's all hydrophobic. It wants to stick to something solid. Imagine that's a toxin and imagine that sticking to the plastic. And this has what we call a bioaccumulation effect. So plastic, quite often when it attracts all those toxins, and studies have shown that actually it can look really attractive to the bottom of the food chain. They want to eat it. And then the smallest parts of the food chain get eaten by the small fish get eaten by the big fish, and all the way up. And every single part of the toxin feeds into the fatty tissues of each of those organisms as they go through. So by the time you get to the top of the trophic pyramid, with things like the apex predators of things like orca, they are gathering in all of that accumulation of toxin. The consequences of this are infertility, and they are death. Who eats fish? This is happening to us as well. This is not news, this is not to scare you, it's just to let you know that if you are eating fish, you are very likely to be eating in the toxins exactly the same as the orcas do. So if you take one thing from this talk, and one thing only, I would say try and eat the smallest fish possible. So tuna maybe off, take that off the menu, but maybe you're eating very small fish like whitebait. Just something to consider. But now for the positive stuff, right? I love this quote. I took a photo of this, it was on the wall of Selfridges. If we could design our way into difficulty, we can design our way out. Yes, I'm a designer. Yes, I have a vested interest in that statement, but I fully believe it to be true. But what we need is a clear strategy for that. This is currently our strategy, recovery. Now, I'm not saying that recovery is completely pointless. It really is great. So if you go to the beach and you see something sitting on the beach, pick it up before it even gets in the ocean. Pick it up before it becomes marine plastic. Beach cleans are absolutely fantastic, but all they're doing is taking stuff out that already exists. Organised beach cleans are fantastic. There's great organisations around the world that do this at scale. Surfers Against Sewage being the local one and the UK-based one. But there's loads of examples of large organisations striving to remove things once it enters back on our beaches. But really that only tackles these two elements. It will tackle the macros and it will tackle the mesos, but it will not tackle the other sizes of the plastics that we have. Sometimes it tackles the megaplastics, particularly if you're talking about recoveries of nets and turning that into something useful. And that's kind of where my research is. But really, there's a lot of stuff that we're just not addressing where we really should be. And my other real problem with this situation at the moment is this is a linear system. We'll pick it up off the beaches, we'll bring it in from the ocean, and what happens to it? It gets binned or it gets incinerated. Doesn't get turned into anything useful, or very rarely does it get turned into anything useful. And I'm a circular girly. I'm all about mimicking the systems of nature to make sure that there's no waste at all. Nature is brilliant in taking everything that is a waste and turning it into a benefit for another species at scale. We're the only species on the planet that does not do this. So how do we make marine plastic circular? Well, this is kind of the methodology that we're working towards. You will still have recovery because even if we were to all stop producing plastic right now, we'd still be gathering in plastic for years or decades to come as it comes back into the beaches. So you do need to have recovery for certain, but then you also need to have prevention. We need to be proactive. And quite often when people talk about marine plastics, they say about turning off the tap because the recovery is just the teaspoon that is basically bailing out an overflowing bathtub. I argue we need to do both, but we also need to do more. We need to turn off the stopcock, and this is where a different element comes in. For me, circularity needs three main things. Yes, I'm coming from the viewpoint of a designer. We need legislation, we need system design, and we need really awesome, fantastic, long-living products. With legislation, and I stress this has to be global, it's rules, it's regulations, it's making sure that the people that are producing the stuff that will eventually end up potentially in the ocean actually pay for the infrastructure in the countries that do not have it at present. What we used to do with a lot of our plastic waste was export it to developing countries because we didn't want to deal with it, but we could pay people cheaply to deal with it somewhere else. But I didn't have the infrastructure to deal with that. So all we do is outsource our problem. That has to stop. And this has to stop not from the UK's perspective, which for the most part it has in some ways, but all around the world. We need global legislation as well. So we might have, and we do have, British standards and European standards, some of which I've been on the board to actually write, around the circularity of plastics. But we need to go further. There's no point having a rule in Europe if the rule is not elsewhere in the world, because as we saw, the ocean connects all of us, regardless of where that plastic starts off. We need to make sure that we are designing circular systems from the start. 80% of any product's environmental impact is decided at the design stage. That's on us as designers, but we have the ability, that's a huge power. And if we're designing systems in such a way that means that recovery at end of life or reuse is something that's factored in, then we are eliminating the problem. This is prevention again. And we need to make sure that instead of things being created from virgin materials, they are created from materials that have been recovered from elsewhere. You've heard in different talks about the fact that we have enough stuff. We've got enough material. Do we need to be making everything from new, or do we need to be strategizing and thinking much, much better about the materials we have already created? And we also need to think about stuff. We live in a consumer society. That's not going to change, regardless of whether you think everything should be, degrowth is something that you believe in. So we do need to have very, very useful consumer products that are made from, I've put marine plastics here, but really you could enter any second life material into that. Now, as far as importance, I believe that legislation is the biggest part. If we're all playing by the same rules, we stand half a chance. The thing that has the smallest amount of impact is the stuff that might be shown to you. The glasses made from marine plastic, the trainers with marine plastic in, the shorts that are made from recovered plastic bottles. That has the smallest amount of impact. Design spans all of these, which is lucky for us because that's kind of what we do. But we need to think in this connected manner across all of these different elements. Visibility is the other way around though, because unless you are interested in legislation, and I promise you it's a lot cooler and sexier than it may sound, it's almost invisible. One legislation, I'm going to borrow a prop. One piece of legislation you might have seen is this. The attachment of the bottle cap and lid. I'm really hoping you haven't yanked the tether off now. That is legislation. That means that if this was to escape the system, your cap and your bottle will go into the same process to allow it to be, to allow it to be recovered in the correct manner. Some of you will probably find that incredibly annoying. Apologies, I was also on the panel that helped write that legislation. But this legislation is there. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. The stuff that you do see a lot of is the stuff that's advertised to you about, buy this because it's made from recycled plastic bottles. And we do need that, as long as you're not being a green cock. This is a term that I coined to try and describe the way that brands try and fool us. Almost any brand will try and sell you something that's made from recycled material is responsible. And that's great. That's what I want. We want stuff made from other stuff, as long as this is not the shiny, shiny look over here, peacocking, we're doing something amazing, and then everything else is just the usual, the everyday, the extractive, the destructive. So when we're thinking about product, we need to make sure that this is a conversation about a whole of good, not just a single thing in a large portfolio that actually, for the most part, is really rubbish. So whenever you're buying something, just check that the company's not been a green cock. But I still think products made from other stuff are incredibly valuable. Because if we do have incredible stuff made from marine plastics, it gives you the ability to learn more about it, just as you are today. And there's this wonderful quote by one of my other heroes, Jacques Cousteau, the oceanographer. We only protect what we love. We only love what we understand. And we only understand what we are taught. And my hope is today that just by learning a little bit about marine plastics, it gives you the ability to take that spark and tell that story to others so they could also see what's beneath the surface. Thank you very much.